The New York skyline glittered against the gathering twilight, a testament to human ambition carved in steel and glass. From the 70th floor of the Harrington Tower, Richard Harrington watched the city transform as darkness fell and millions of lights flickered to life. At 58, he commanded a view that matched his station's CEO of Harrington Global, a $12 billion empire with interests spanning real estate technology and hospitality. The crown jewel of his holdings was the American Legacy restaurant chain, an upscale dining experience that had redefined luxury dining with a patriotic flair. 23 locations across the country, each more profitable than the last, or so the reports claimed. Richard frowned at the television mounted on his office wall, where a financial news anchor discussed a food safety scandal at a high-end California restaurant chain. The company's stock had plummeted 30% in a single day. "It can happen that quickly," he murmured, turning away from the window to study his reflection in the polished surface of his desk. The face that looked back at him belonged to a successful man. Silver hair perfectly cut the lines around his eyes, suggesting wisdom rather than age, his posture military straight, even after all these years. But his eyes told a different story. They held the weight of a journey from nothing to everything, and the growing suspicion that everything might not be enough. Richard picked up the silver frame on his desk, a photograph of a teenage boy with a fishing rod standing beside a younger version of himself. Michael had been 12 then, eager for his father's approval, still believing Richard hung the moon and stars. Before the divorce, before Harvard Business School, before joining Harrington Global as marketing director and gradually becoming a stranger who happened to share his DNA. The intercom on his desk buzzed. "Mr. Harrington, the board members are gathered in the conference room." "Thank you, Diane. I'll be right there." Richard straightened his brioni tie, a ritual that centered him before battle. The quarterly board meetings had once been a formality, a chance to showcase his latest victories. Lately, they'd taken on the feel of an inquisition. The conference room fell silent as he entered. 8 men and 3 women in impeccable business attire, their expressions carefully neutral. Thomas Crawford, his COO and oldest friend, gave him a slight nod from his seat at the far end. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had served him well from the deserts of Kuwait to the boardrooms of Manhattan. "Shall we begin?" The presentation went smoothly until Walter Griffith, the silver-haired chairman of the board, cleared his throat. "These numbers from American Legacy look excellent, Richard. Almost too excellent, wouldn't you say?" A current of tension rippled through the room. "I'm not sure I follow, Walter. Food costs down 15% while maintaining 5-star quality, labor costs reduced despite the national labor shortage, and yet customer satisfaction scores at an all-time high." Griffith's smile didn't reach his eyes. "It's remarkable." "We've implemented new supply chain efficiencies," Richard replied evenly, "and our management teams are exceptional. So exceptional that we've received no reports of the minor health code violations that have affected our competitors. No employee complaints, no supply issues during the worst global supply chain crisis in decades." Richard felt the first stirrings of unease. "I believe it speaks to our operational excellence." "Perhaps," Griffith conceded. "Or perhaps we're not getting the full picture. There have been murmurs, Richard. A small incident at our Boston location that was handled quietly. A supplier complaint that never made it to the quarterly report." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "The board has decided to commission an independent audit of American Legacy operations," Griffith continued. "We've also discussed the possibility of accelerating our succession planning timeline." There it was, the veiled threat of forced retirement packaged in corporate euphemism. "I see," Richard said, his expression unchanged despite the anger flaring in his chest. "And when were you planning to inform me?" "We're informing you now." Griffith's tone was almost apologetic. "We value everything you've built, Richard. Your legacy at Harrington Global is secure, but perhaps it's time to consider a more advisory role." The word legacy struck Richard like a physical blow. This company wasn't just his career, it was his life's work. The thing he'd built from nothing after coming home from Desert Storm with nothing but military discipline and relentless ambition. The empire he'd sacrificed his marriage to create that had cost him his relationship with his son. It was all he had left. "With all due respect to the board," Richard said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him, I believe I've earned the right to investigate any concerns personally before we involve outside parties. This isn't a reflection on you, Griffith assured him, though they both knew it was exactly that. Give me 30 days, Richard insisted. If I find nothing, we proceed with the audit. If I find problems, I'll fix them myself. A silent exchange of glances around the table. Very well, Griffith finally agreed. 30 days, Richard, but the board expects complete transparency about whatever you find. Walking back to his office, Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in years: fear. Not of losing his position or his wealth. Those were just trappings. He feared losing his legacy, the only meaningful thing he'd created. Thomas fell into step beside him. That could have gone worse. They want me out, Tom. They want to protect their investment. You've been distracted lately. The divorce finalized, Michael barely speaking to you. It's taken a toll. Richard stopped at his office door. Do you think the reports are too good to be true? Thomas hesitated, loyalty warring with honesty. I think 23 restaurants across the country don't run perfectly simultaneously by accident. Something doesn't add up. Richard nodded slowly. Then I need to find out what's happening before they show me the door. He glanced at his reflection in the glass door, seeing not the powerful CEO, but the hungry young veteran who'd built this company from scratch. I think it's time for Rick Jensen to make a comeback. Thomas recognized the name, his eyes widening. You can't be serious. Your undercover days were 20 years ago. You're the face of the company now, which is precisely why I need to see the operation through different eyes. Richard's expression hardened with determination. Something's wrong with my company, Tom, and I'm going to find out what it is. Sarah Mitchell's feet ached as she climbed the 5 flights to her Brooklyn apartment. The elevator had been broken for 3 months, and the landlord's promises to fix it had grown as stale as the air in the narrow stairwell. 12-hour shifts at American Legacy Manhattan would exhaust anyone, but the physical fatigue paled compared to the emotional toll. Serving the ultra-wealthy required a special kind of performance, invisible when needed, attentive, when summoned always with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. At 27, Sarah had once imagined a very different life for herself. The accounting degree from the University of Chicago that she'd never completed. The promising internship at Deloitte she'd abandoned. The life she'd put on hold when her parents died within 6 months of each other, leaving her the sole guardian of her brother Kevin. Their tiny 2-bedroom apartment came into view as she rounded the final landing. Expensive by most standards, criminally so for its size and condition, but it was 3 blocks from the best cystic fibrosis treatment center in New York. For Kevin, she would pay twice as much without complaint. She unlocked the door quietly in case her brother was sleeping. Kev, I'm home. In here, came the reply from the bedroom, followed by a muffled cough. Kevin sat propped against pillows, his laptop balanced on a hospital tray, textbooks scattered around him. At 17, he should have been worried about prom dates and college applications. Instead, he navigated virtual high school between treatments and hospital stays, his thin frame and pale complexion betraying the battle his body fought every day. How was your day? Sarah asked, setting down her bag and sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. Good, I actually made it through all my classes without a coughing fit. How about you save any millionaires from starvation? Sarah smiled at their running joke. Just the usual, rich businessmen pretending their Scotch preferences reflect their personality. Trophy wives ordering salads with 17 modifications. Sounds riveting. Kevin closed his laptop. Your medicine head called. They've got me on the list for the new treatment protocol. Sarah's heart leapt. That's amazing. Yeah, except our insurance is calling it experimental. They won't cover it. The hope that had momentarily buoyed her sank like a stone. How much? Oh, 80,000 for the first year. Then they reassess. Sarah did the mental calculation. She'd become expert at current savings, upcoming bills. The credit cards already maxed out the loans she was barely keeping current. We'll figure it out, she said with forced confidence. I'll pick up some extra shifts. You're already working doubles 4 days a week, Kevin protested. Then I'll work doubles 5 days a week. She ruffled his hair the way she had when he was small. Don't worry about the money. That's my job. After making sure Kevin took his evening medications, Sarah retreated to the kitchen where bills covered every surface like snowdrifts. She opened the refrigerator, finding it predictably sparse, and settled for a yogurt that was only 2 days past its expiration date. Sarah's gaze drifted to the bookshelf where a single-frame photo stood among medical reference books and prescription bottles. The Mitchell family, all four of them, standing proudly beside their 1989 Chevrolet, her father's first new car purchase, and the symbol of everything he'd believed about hard work and its rewards. "We'll figure it out," she whispered to his image, wishing she believed it. Her phone buzzed with a text from her manager at American Legacy. "Need you to come in early tomorrow. Weber wants to discuss inventory reports." 9 a.m. sharp. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the apartment's faulty heating. Douglas Weber, the restaurant manager, had been watching her like a hawk ever since she'd questioned a shipment of meat that didn't match the premium quality the restaurant advertised. She texted back a simple acknowledgement, then checked the time. Nearly midnight, and she had to be up at 7 to prepare Kevin's morning treatments before heading to this unexpected meeting. As she prepared for bed, Sarah caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Her father's determined eyes stared back at her along with her mother's stubborn chin. "Mitchell strong," she whispered, repeating the family motto that had sustained generations through coal mines, factory floors, and now the sterile corridors of hospitals. Tomorrow's meeting with Weber would be unpleasant, but she'd faced worse. And for Kevin, she would face anything, American Legacy. Manhattan occupied the ground floor of a glass tower in Midtown, and its entrance marked by a discreet brass plaque and a doorman who could assess a person's net worth with a single glance. Before opening hours, the restaurant was a different world. Harsh fluorescent lights instead of flattering amber, the elegant dining room eclipsed by the organized chaos of the kitchen and service areas. Sarah arrived at 8:45, finding Douglas Weber already waiting in his office, a glass cube with strategic views of both the kitchen and the main dining room. At 48, Weber cultivated the look of old money sophistication, perfectly tailored Hugo Boss suits. Rolex Submariner gleaming on his wrist hair, styled to suggest both authority and a hint of rakish charm. The effect was somewhat undermined by the coldness in his eyes. "Mitchell, close the door." Sarah complied, remaining standing, as Weber hadn't offered her a seat. On his desk lay a stack of inventory reports, her handwriting visible on the top sheet. "Do you know why I asked you here?" "You mentioned the inventory reports, sir." Weber's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, specifically the discrepancies I've found in them." "Discrepancies?" Sarah kept her voice neutral, though her heart had begun to race. "Don't play dumb, Mitchell. It doesn't suit you." Weber slid a paper across the desk. "This shipment of Wagyu beef. You logged it as 12 kilos. Our supplier invoice shows 15. There was a mistake on the delivery. I noted it on the receiving form and had the driver initial it. The weight was off." "So you claim." Weber leaned back, studying her. "Just like you claimed the quality of the Heartland Provisions shipment wasn't up to standard last month." "It wasn't?" Sarah replied, a note of defiance creeping into her voice. "The marbling was inconsistent with prime-grade beef. Yet our executive chef found no issues. Strange, isn't it? Almost as if someone with no culinary training is second-guessing professionals." The implication hung in the air between them. "And now we have missing inventory," Weber continued. "First quality concerns, now quantity discrepancies. One might start to see a pattern, Mitchell." Sarah felt a chill. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Weber?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts." He stood circling the desk to tower over her. 3 kilos of premium Wagyu beef valued at approximately $700 are unaccounted for. Either our supplier is shorting us, which seems unlikely given our 5-year relationship, or someone on our staff is helping themselves. "I didn't take anything," Sarah said firmly. "Check the security cameras. Check my locker. Check my bag right now." The theft wouldn't be so obvious. Weber's voice dropped to a dangerous purr. "You have access to the receiving dock. You sign for deliveries. You could easily arrange for items to disappear before they're even logged." "That's ridiculous. I've worked here for 2 years without a single issue." "Until now." Weber picked up another paper. "And it's not just the beef, is it? Small discrepancies in wine inventory. A case of truffles that arrived damaged but was never returned for credit. It all adds up, Mitchell, to about $7,500 by my calculation." The amount struck Sarah like a physical blow. "That's impossible." "Yet the numbers don't lie." Weber's smile widened, revealing teeth too perfect to be natural. Of course I haven't taken this to corporate yet or to the police. The threat was obvious. Sarah felt her mouth go dry. What do you want? I want what's best for American legacy, of course. Weber returned to his seat, every movement calculated for maximum intimidation. I'm prepared to handle this internally provided you cooperate. Cooperate how? You'll work off the debt. No tips for the foreseeable future. They go directly to me to offset the losses. Double shifts when I need them. And you'll help me with some additional bookkeeping that requires discretion. The last word carried a weight that made Sarah's skin crawl. And if I refuse, if I go to corporate myself, Weber's expression hardened. Then I press charges for theft. I have documentation that would convince any prosecutor. You'd lose your job, face criminal charges, and with your record, who would hire you again? He paused, examining his manicured nails. How is your brother doing, by the way, Kevin, isn't it? I understand his treatments are quite expensive. The casual mention of Kevin's name sent a surge of fear through Sarah, unlike anything she'd felt before. Weber had done his research, identified her vulnerability with surgical precision. You wouldn't. I assure you I would. Weber opened his desk drawer and withdrew a folder. I'm not unreasonable, Mitchell. I'm offering you a way to make this right. All you need to do is sign this acknowledgement of responsibility and agree to the repayment terms. Sarah's mind raced. The document was a confession, an admission of guilt she could never take back. But without her income, without her insurance, Kevin's condition would deteriorate rapidly. I need time to think, she managed. You have until the end of your shift today, Weber replied coldly. And Mitchell, don't even think about involving anyone else. This stays between us. As Sarah turned to leave, Weber added casually, oh, and you'll start with the bookkeeping tonight. I have some vendor reconciliations that need attention. Your community college accounting courses should be adequate for the task. Sarah froze. How did he know about her education? She'd never mentioned it to anyone at the restaurant. Exiting Weber's office, she felt as if she'd narrowly escaped a predator, aware that she was still very much in his hunting grounds. The restaurant staff moved around her in their pre-opening routine, unaware of the exchange that had just altered the trajectory of her life. In the staff bathroom, Sarah splashed cold water on her face and stared at her reflection. Weber was setting her up, that much was clear. But why? What could he possibly gain from forcing her to falsify records? She thought of the meat shipments she'd questioned, the mysterious vendor, Heartland Provisions, that appeared on invoices but whose trucks she'd never seen. The pieces weren't fitting together, but Sarah sensed they formed a picture far more troubling than simple embezzlement. Her phone vibrated, a text from Kevin's doctor about appointment changes, a reminder of what was at stake. Sarah straightened her uniform, squared her shoulders, and prepared for her shift. She needed this job. She needed the insurance. She needed time to figure out what Weber was really up to. For now, she would play along. But Sarah Mitchell was her father's daughter, and the truth was a debt she always paid in full. Richard Harrington stood in his penthouse bedroom, staring not at the magnificent view, but at an old photograph hanging discreetly beside his closet. A younger version of himself in desert camouflage, the Kuwait oil fields burning in the background, his arm around Thomas Crawford. Both of them leaned determined, their eyes holding the particular 1,000-yard stare of men who had seen combat but still believed in the mission. Operation Desert Storm had defined him in ways that Harvard Business School never could. It had taught him about leadership, about making decisions under pressure, about seeing beneath the surface of situations to the truth underneath. Skills he would need now. Thomas arrived to find Richard pulling clothes from the back of his walk-in closet, items that hadn't seen daylight in years. You're really going through with this? It wasn't a question. I don't have a choice, Tom. Richard held up a faded leather jacket, examining it critically. The board's given me 30 days. An audit would take at least 20. That leaves me a 10-day window to actually fix whatever's wrong. And you think playing dress-up is the answer? Thomas settled into a chair, watching his old friend with a mixture of concern and amusement. You're Richard Harrington. Your face has been on the cover of Forbes. Twice. Which is precisely why I can't walk into my own restaurant and get honest answers. Richard tossed the jacket onto his bed. The minute people know who I am, they perform. They show me what they think I want to see. And what makes you think they won't recognize you anyway? Richard smiled grimly. Because people see what they expect to see. No one expects a billionaire CEO to be wearing secondhand clothes and asking about job openings. Thomas sighed, recognizing the determined set of his friend's jaw. I still think there are better ways to approach this. Corporate security, surprise inspections, hell hire a private investigator. All of which would create paper trails and alert whoever's behind these irregularities. Richard shook his head. No, this needs to be completely off the books, just like Kuwait. We were 30 years younger in Kuwait, Thomas reminded him, and it wasn't exactly a smashing success, if you recall. The mission they never discussed, the intelligence that proved faulty, the decisions that had haunted them both. I learned from those mistakes, Richard said quietly. And I'm not asking you to come with me this time, just to cover for me here. Keep the board at bay, and be ready when I need backup. Thomas studied his friend for a long moment. What's really driving this, Richard? Is it the company or is it proving something to yourself? Richard paused, a weathered Yankees cap in his hands. Does it matter? Either way, I need to know the truth. And if the truth is ugly, if someone high up in your organization is involved, then I'll deal with it. Richard's expression hardened, even if it's Michael. Thomas raised an eyebrow. You think your son might be involved? I think Michael's been distant lately, defensive about the marketing department's relationship with operations, and he has the access and authority to cover up problems. Richard's voice remained steady despite the pain behind his words. I don't want to believe it, but I can't rule it out. All the more reason to handle this officially, Thomas argued. If there's even a chance this could involve your son, you need distance and deniability. If my son is involved, I need to be the one to discover it, not some audit team, not the board. Richard's tone left no room for debate. I built this company from nothing, Tom. Every brick, every policy, every success and failure mine. If it's rotting from within, I need to see it with my own eyes. Thomas recognized defeat when he saw it. What do you need from me? Background on all the restaurant managers, especially the Manhattan location. Financials, performance reviews, personal history, anything that might suggest vulnerability or corruption. I'll have it for you by morning. And I need someone with investigation experience. Former law enforcement, someone who can move in circles, we can't. Discreet, skilled, and not connected to Harrington Global in any way. Thomas nodded slowly. I might know someone. Former FBI, specialized in food safety and corporate crime. She's private sector now, but she's the best. Named Rebecca Daniels, 52, divorced former special agent with 15 years in the Bureau. She doesn't come cheap, but she's worth every penny. Richard nodded. Contact her, but don't tell her who I really am, not yet. She deals directly with me in character. And what character is that exactly? Richard held up the Yankees cap, a half smile playing at his lips. Rick Jensen, former Marine Gulf War veteran, commercial truck driver looking for a career change. High school education, divorced, no kids. Nothing to suggest wealth or power. In other words, the man you might have been if things had gone differently after the war, Thomas observed quietly. Richard didn't answer immediately, his gaze returning to the old photograph. Maybe, or maybe just a simpler version of who I actually am. The American Legacy, Manhattan location, opened its doors at 11 a.m. for the lunch service, but the real power brokers arrived after 1 p.m. when the restaurant's ambiance shifted from efficient business lunches to lingering afternoon meetings where deals worth millions were casually discussed over rare scotch and perfectly seared steaks. Richard arrived at 1:30, deliberately timing his entrance to coincide with peak service. The restaurant's exterior featured subtle, patriotic elements, a discreet American eagle embossed on the glass doors, a small replica of the Liberty Bell, beside the hostess stand. Inside, the decor balanced luxury with nationalism, dark wood paneling, leather booths, oil paintings of iconic American landscapes, and tasteful historical memorabilia displayed in elegant cases. It was exactly as he'd approved in the concept meetings 3 years earlier, yet experiencing it as a customer rather than the owner gave Richard a fresh perspective. The patriotic elements that had seemed thoughtful in boardroom presentations now struck him as possibly heavy-handed, particularly the framed copies of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence behind the bar. The hostess, a statuesque blonde whose name tag read Amber, looked up as he approached her, practice smile faltering slightly as she assessed his appearance. "Good afternoon," she said, her tone several degrees cooler than it would have been for a guest in Armani. "Do you have a reservation?" Richard shook his head deliberately, roughening his normally precise diction. "No, ma'am, just hoping to get some lunch." Amber's gaze flicked to the nearly full reservation book before her. "I'm afraid we're quite busy today. Perhaps one of the casual dining establishments down the block would be more suitable." The dismissal was polite but unmistakable. Richard had witnessed this subtle class filtering before, but experiencing it firsthand stirred an unexpected anger. "I was specifically hoping to try American Legacy," he persisted, adopting the slightly apologetic tone of someone unaccustomed to luxury but determined to experience it. "It's sort of a special occasion." Amber's smile remained fixed as she assessed the potential disruption of turning him away versus the displeasure of regular patrons at seeing someone so clearly not their social equal in their midst. "I might be able to seat you at the bar," she finally offered, clearly considering this a generous concession. "That would be great, thank you." As he followed her through the dining room, Richard noted the reactions of other diners, the quick dismissive glances, the momentary pauses in conversation, the subtle shifting of expensive handbags away from his perceived working-class presence. The social choreography was fascinating and disheartening in equal measure. The bar seating placed him at the far end, close to the swinging kitchen doors, where the occasional shout from kitchen staff and the clatter of dishes would disrupt any normal dining experience. It was, Richard realized, the restaurant equivalent of the back of the bus. After several minutes of pointed invisibility, a server approached. Unlike the others in their crisp uniforms and practiced demeanors, this young woman had an authenticity about her that immediately caught Richard's attention. "Good afternoon, sir. My name is Sarah, and I'll be taking care of you today." Her smile was genuine if tired around the edges. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" Richard noted the dark circles under her eyes, the slight tremor in her hand as she placed a water glass before him, the way she stood favoring one leg slightly, the subtle signs of exhaustion he recognized from his own mirror on particularly difficult days. "Just water for now, thank you," he replied, maintaining his role. "This is my first time here. Any recommendations?" Something flickered across Sarah's face, a brief, unguarded reaction before her professional mask returned. Was it surprise at being asked her opinion, or something else? "The ribeye is exceptional," she said carefully, "though all our steaks are premium quality." Richard detected a slight hesitation, but Sarah glanced around quickly, then lowered her voice. "If you're here for a special occasion, the Founding Fathers steak is our signature dish. It's dry-aged for 60 days and comes with seasonal accompaniments, but it is quite expensive." "How expensive are we talking?" $600, she replied, watching for his reaction. Richard let his eyes widen appropriately. "For a steak. It's served with black truffle butter, roasted bone marrow, and comes with a tableside presentation of its provenance and aging process." Sarah explained, her tone suggesting she found the theatrics as excessive as he was pretending to. "Quite a splurge," Richard mused, watching her closely. "There are many excellent options at lower price points," Sarah offered quickly without the condescension he might have expected. "The New York strip is outstanding at a quarter of the price." "And what about drinks? I hear this place has some special bourbon." Again that flicker of something behind her eyes. "We have an extensive selection. The Liberty Reserve is our most exclusive offering, aged 25 years. It's $150 per ounce." Richard made a show of deliberating, then straightened his shoulders as if coming to a decision. "Well, like I said, it's a special day. I'll have the Founding Fathers steak, medium rare, and a glass of the Liberty Reserve." He expected surprise, perhaps even suspicion. Instead, Sarah simply nodded with professional respect. "Excellent choices. Would you like to hear about our appetizers while your drinks are being prepared?" Throughout their interaction, Richard noted that Sarah treated him with the same dignified service she would offer any guest, regardless of appearance or perceived wealth. There was no subtle shift in attentiveness, no hint that she considered him less worthy of her time than the Wall Street types at the prime tables. As she walked away to place his order, Richard observed her interaction with Douglas Weber, the restaurant manager whose file Thomas had sent over that morning. Weber, immaculately dressed in a Hugo Boss suit that probably cost more than most of his employees made in a month, intercepted Sarah near the service station. Though Richard couldn't hear their exchange, the body language was clear. Weber's aggressive stance, Sarah's defensive posture, the power dynamic painfully evident. Weber glanced toward Richard, his expression calculating before saying something else to Sarah that made her shoulders tense. She nodded stiffly and continued toward the bar to place the drink order. When Sarah returned with the bourbon, her professional composure had been restored, but Richard noted a new tension in her movements. "Your liberty reserved, sir," she said, placing the crystal tumbler before him with care. "The chef has begun preparing your steak. It will take approximately 35 minutes as it's prepared to order." "Thank you, Sarah." Richard deliberately used her name, establishing a human connection. "Is everything all right?" Your manager seemed concerned about something. Surprise flashed across her face, quickly replaced by caution. "Everything's fine. Mr. Weber just wanted to confirm your order." "Because of how I'm dressed," Richard stated matter-of-factly, watching her reaction. Sarah hesitated, professional discretion warring with basic honesty. "We have many guests who, well, the Founding Father's steak is typically ordered for business dinners or special celebrations, not by guys who look like truck drivers." Richard smiled slightly, letting her know he understood the situation. "I wouldn't presume to judge anyone based on appearance," Sarah replied carefully. "My father always said the measure of a person isn't what they wear or what they own, but how they treat others." The simple statement, delivered without pretension, struck Richard deeply. It was precisely the kind of principle he tried to instill in his own company's culture. Yet somewhere between the boardroom declarations and the dining room reality, the message had clearly been lost. "Your father sounds like a wise man." He was. The past tense hung in the air between them, a small but significant revelation. As his meal progressed, Richard maintained his role while observing both the restaurant operations and Sarah specifically. The steak, when it arrived with its elaborate presentation, was indeed exceptional. Yet he noticed Sarah's subtle tension when Weber performed the tableside service, explaining the meat's premium quality and exclusive sourcing. "Our beef comes exclusively from heritage breed cattle raised on sustainable family farms in the American heartland," Weber explained with practiced smoothness. "Each cut is personally selected by our executive chef and dry-aged in-house using proprietary techniques." Richard nodded appreciatively, playing his part, while noting the rehearsed quality of the pitch. What struck him most, however, was Sarah's almost imperceptible reaction, a fleeting expression that suggested she knew something about this narrative wasn't entirely accurate. By the time Richard finished his meal, he had confirmed his suspicion that something was indeed wrong at American Legacy, though the exact nature remained elusive. The service was impressive but mechanical. The food excellent, but perhaps not quite the artisanal experience promised in the marketing materials. Most concerning was the obvious tension between Weber and certain staff members, particularly Sarah. When the check arrived, Richard paid in cash, deliberately leaving no tip on the table. Instead, as Sarah cleared his plate, he made direct eye contact with her. "The meal was exceptional, Sarah. Thank you for your recommendations." She smiled, the genuine warmth in her expression contrasting sharply with the rehearsed pleasantries from other staff. "It was my pleasure, sir. I hope you enjoyed your special occasion." Richard caught the subtle movement as Sarah slipped a folded cocktail napkin beside his water glass, her motion disguised as adjusting the table setting. Her eyes held his for a fraction longer than necessary, conveying a silent message before she turned to serve another table. Intrigued, Richard waited until Weber's attention was directed elsewhere before palming the napkin and sliding it into his jacket pocket. He left the restaurant without looking back, feeling Weber's calculating gaze between his shoulder blades. Only when he was several blocks away, sitting in a small coffee shop far removed from American Legacy's luxury, did Richard carefully unfold the napkin. The message, written in neat, precise handwriting, sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the autumn air. "Food unsafe, Weber selling meat from closed facility, documents in safe behind declaration painting. They're watching you. Patriot Enterprises is the key." Richard stared at the words, understanding with sudden clarity that his simple investigation had just become something far more dangerous than he had anticipated. Someone in his flagship restaurant was potentially endangering customers, and a young waitress had just risked everything to tell him. The game had changed. And Richard Harrington now had 30 days not just to save his company, but possibly to save lives. The coffee shop's ambient noise faded into the background as Richard stared at the handwritten message. The implications were staggering. If True Weber wasn't just skimming profits or cutting corners, he was potentially poisoning customers with contaminated meat. And somehow this waitress had discovered it. Richard pulled out his burner phone and dialed Thomas. "I need everything you can find on a company called Patriot Enterprises," he said without preamble. "And I need it yesterday." "That bad?" Thomas's voice held a note of concern. "Worse." Richard glanced around to ensure no one was within earshot. "Someone at the Manhattan restaurant is using meat from a condemned facility, and there's a paper trail locked in a safe behind a painting." "Jesus Christ, Richard." Thomas lowered his voice. "This isn't just corporate malfeasance. That's criminal negligence. Maybe even attempted murder if they know the meat is unsafe. Which is why I need to move quickly." Richard took a sip of his now cold coffee, mind racing through potential next steps. "The waitress who slipped me the note, her name is Sarah Mitchell. I need a complete background on her, too." "You think she's involved?" "I think she's terrified and taking a huge risk. I need to know if she's trustworthy before I make my next move. I'll have both reports to you by evening. What's your plan in the meantime?" Richard considered his options. His instinct was to confront Weber immediately, but that would blow his cover and potentially put Sarah in danger. "I'm going to stake out the restaurant, see who comes and goes. Maybe follow Weber when he leaves." "That's not exactly subtle, Richard. If he's already suspicious of you, I'll be careful. Just get me that information." Richard ended the call and settled in for what would likely be a long afternoon. The coffee shop provided a decent vantage point of American Legacy's side entrance, where deliveries and staff would come and go. He ordered another coffee and a sandwich, setting up his surveillance with the practiced patience he'd learned in the military decades earlier. As the afternoon progressed, Richard observed the restaurant's operations with new scrutiny. A produce delivery arrived at 3 p.m., the boxes clearly labeled "Bud" from a reputable local supplier. At 4 p.m., a wine distributor's truck made a substantial delivery, cases carried in by uniformed employees. But the meat delivery Richard expected never materialized, despite American Legacy's reputation for fresh, daily sourced protein. At 5:30 p.m., the dinner shift staff began arriving. Richard watched Sarah Mitchell exit through the service door, change from her uniform into jeans and a worn Columbia University sweatshirt that was likely secondhand. She looked exhausted but alert, her eyes scanning the street before she headed toward the subway station. Richard considered following her, but decided against it. If Weber was watching, it could put her in more danger. Besides, he needed to see where the manager went after his shift. Weber emerged at 11:45 p.m., long after the dinner service had ended. Unlike his staff, who departed in practical outfits suitable for public transportation, Weber wore his expensive suit like armor. He walked briskly to the corner, where a black Audi Q7 waited, its engine already running. Richard quickly hailed a taxi, instructing the driver to follow the SUV at a distance. The Audi headed north, eventually crossing into the Bronx. After 20 minutes of increasingly industrial surroundings, it turned into what appeared to be an abandoned meatpacking facility. The faded sign read, "Midwest Consolidated Processing," but a newer, smaller sign beside the gate proclaimed, "Heartland Provisions, Private Property." Richard had the taxi drop him a block away, then circled back on foot, keeping to the shadows. The facility should have been dark at this hour, but lights glowed from within, and several vehicles were parked in the loading area, including Weber's Audi. Through a grimy window, Richard could make out men loading boxes into refrigerated trucks. The packages bore the Heartland Provisions logo, but the facility itself was clearly dilapidated, with visible signs of neglect and poor sanitation even from the outside. Richard took several photos with his phone, then retreated to a safe distance to call Thomas. "I've found our meat supplier," he said grimly, "and it's definitely not up to code. Weber just arrived for what looks like a late-night shipment." "I'm sending you the information now," Thomas replied. "Patriot Enterprises is a shell company with some very suspicious financial patterns. It owns Heartland Provisions, which acquired the Midwest Consolidated facility after it was shut down by health inspectors 18 months ago." Shut down for what? E. coli contamination. 3 deaths, dozens hospitalized. The owners declared bankruptcy to avoid lawsuits, then the facility was supposedly closed permanently. Except it's operating right now, sending meat to my restaurants. Richard felt a cold fury building inside him. What about Sarah Mitchell? 27 years old, former accounting student at the University of Chicago, but dropped out 2 years ago when her parents died within months of each other. Legal guardian to her brother Kevin, 17, who has cystic fibrosis. Crushing medical debt. No criminal record. By all accounts, she's exactly what she appears to be, a hardworking woman caught in impossible circumstances. Richard thought of the tired determination in Sarah's eyes, the quiet dignity with which she'd performed her job, despite Weber's obvious intimidation. She's risking everything by reaching out to me, he murmured. She has no idea who I really am, but she took the chance anyway. Which means Weber must have something on her, Thomas replied. Someone that desperate doesn't rock the boat unless they're truly frightened. Or truly principled. Richard watched as men began loading another truck. I need to talk to her directly. Find out exactly what she knows and what Weber is holding over her. That could put her in more danger, Richard. She's already in danger. Weber's the type who eliminates loose ends. Richard's military training kicked in, assessing threats and planning countermeasures. I need backup on this, Tom. It's time to bring in your FBI contact. I'll call Rebecca Daniels now. But Richard, be careful. If this operation is as extensive as it seems, there could be powerful people involved. That's what I'm counting on, Richard replied grimly. Because someone in my company had to sign off on these meat purchases, and I intend to find out who. O'Malley's bar occupied a weathered corner in Hell's Kitchen, its neon beer signs and fading Yankees pennants speaking to decades of serving the neighborhood's working class. A baseball game played silently on the television above the bar, Yankees versus Red Sox, a rivalry as old as the establishment itself. Richard, still in his Rick Jensen persona, nursed a beer while watching the entrance. Thomas had arranged for Rebecca Daniels to meet him here, describing her as impossible to miss. He understood what Thomas meant when she walked in. Rebecca Daniels carried herself with the unmistakable alertness of law enforcement observing exits, scanning faces, positioning herself with her back to the wall. At 52, she had the fit build of someone who hadn't abandoned physical training upon leaving active service. Her salt and pepper hair was cut in a practical bob, and she wore no jewelry except a simple watch and a small American flag pin on her blazer lapel. She spotted Richard immediately, despite never having seen him before. Their eyes met, and she gave a slight nod before approaching. Mr. Jensen, she asked, sliding onto the bar stool beside him. Ms. Daniels, thank you for coming. Rebecca caught his slip during their initial meeting, her eyes narrowing. Your company, I thought you were a truck driver. Richard recovered quickly. Figure of speech. I delivered to them for years. Felt like my route, my customers. Rebecca didn't seem entirely convinced, but she let it pass. We need to move carefully. If Weber is connected to Patriot, he might have protection from people who won't hesitate to eliminate problems. All the more reason to get Sarah somewhere safe and find out exactly what she knows. Richard finished his beer and placed a $20 bill on the bar. I'll contact you once I've arranged the meeting. As they parted outside the bar, Rebecca placed a hand on Richard's arm. One more thing, Jensen. I don't know what your real story is, but I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt because Thomas vouched for you. Don't make me regret it. Richard met her gaze steadily. I won't. This is about stopping people who think they're above the law. Nothing more. As Rebecca walked away, Richard checked his phone to find a text from Thomas with an address in Brooklyn and a simple message. Sarah Mitchell lives here. Brother admitted to NYU Langone this morning. Respiratory distress. Richard felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. If Sarah's brother was hospitalized, she would be even more vulnerable to pressure from Weber. He needed to reach her before the manager realized she'd passed information to a stranger. The game had escalated, and the stakes were no longer just about saving his company. Lives hung in the balance, including that of a young woman who'd risked everything to do the right thing. The intensive care waiting room at NYU Langone Medical Center offered little comfort beyond its antiseptic cleanliness. Sarah Mitchell sat alone, her face pale with exhaustion and worry, a half-empty cup of vending machine coffee growing cold in her hands. Kevin's condition had deteriorated rapidly overnight. A sudden fever increased difficulty breathing the terrifying blue tinge to his lips that had prompted her frantic call to 911. Now he lay in the ICU intubated while doctors administered aggressive antibiotics for what they suspected was a resistant lung infection. Sarah checked her phone for the 20th time in an hour. 3 missed calls and 5 text messages from Weber, each more demanding than the last. "Where are you? Your shift started 20 minutes ago. This is unacceptable, Mitchell. Answer your phone now, last chance before I take action." The final message had arrived 10 minutes ago, and its vague threat sent a chill through Sarah's already fragile composure. She should call him back, explain about Kevin, beg for understanding she knew wouldn't come. But the thought of Weber's cold voice made her physically ill. Instead, she opened her laptop, connecting to the hospital's Wi-Fi. If she couldn't go to work, she could at least try to make sense of what she'd discovered in Weber's office. The figures she'd memorized from his ledger, the invoices from Heartland Provisions that never matched the actual deliveries, the massive cash deposits to accounts she'd never seen on the official books. Sarah had majored in forensic accounting before dropping out to care for Kevin. She recognized money laundering when she saw it. The question was, what was she going to do about it? The stranger in the restaurant, would he actually help, or had she risked everything for nothing? Her phone buzzed again. Weber. This time she answered. "Hello. Mitchell." Weber's voice was glacier cold. "Explain yourself." "My brother's in the ICU," Sarah replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I had to call an ambulance this morning. I should have called you. I'm sorry, but it's been chaotic and—" "What hospital?" The question caught her off guard. "NYU Langone." "Why?" "Your brother's condition is unfortunate." Weber said, his tone suggesting he found it merely inconvenient. "But it doesn't excuse your absence without notice. Furthermore, there's the matter of our conversation yesterday. The documentation I asked you to prepare." Sarah closed her eyes, remembering the additional bookkeeping Weber had demanded, falsified invoices designed to cover the discrepancies in meat purchases. "I haven't had time," she said. "Kevin will need ongoing medical care," Weber interrupted smoothly. "Care that requires insurance. Insurance that comes with your employment at American Legacy." The threat couldn't have been clearer. "I understand," Sarah said quietly. "When do you need the documents?" "Tonight. I'll be at the restaurant until midnight." "Don't disappoint me again, Mitchell." Weber paused, his voice dropping to a menacing purr. "And regarding our other matter, the gentleman you served yesterday, did you speak with him about anything inappropriate?" Sarah's blood ran cold. "No, of course not. He was just a customer." "Interesting, because our security cameras captured a rather peculiar interaction, almost as if you passed him something." Sarah's throat tightened, her mind racing for a plausible explanation. "His credit card fell on the floor. I was just returning it to him. He paid in cash." The quiet statement hung in the air between them, damning in its simplicity. I don't remember," Sarah stammered. "It was busy and I had multiple tables." "I see." Weber's tone suggested he saw all too clearly. "We'll discuss this further tonight when you deliver the documents. Don't be late." The call ended, leaving Sarah staring at her phone in terror. Weber knew. Somehow he'd seen her pass the note. She was cornered, with Kevin more vulnerable than ever, and no way out of the trap Weber had set. A nurse appeared in the waiting room doorway. "Ms. Mitchell, your brother's asking for you." Sarah nodded, gathering her things with trembling hands. As she followed the nurse down the sterile corridor, her mind spun through increasingly desperate scenarios. If she didn't appear tonight with the falsified documents, Weber would almost certainly fire her, leaving Kevin without insurance coverage for his hospitalization. If she did show up, Weber would likely confront her about the note, possibly with consequences even more dire than termination. As Sarah returned to the waiting room to collect her belongings, a nurse approached her with a slip of paper. "Someone left this for you at the front desk," the nurse explained. "Said it was important." Sarah unfolded the note with trepidation, half expecting Weber's handwriting. Instead, she found an unfamiliar scrawl. "Sarah, I received your message and am investigating. You're in danger. Meet me at Riverside Park, 79th Street entrance, 3 p.m. today. Come alone. I can help protect your brother. RJ." Sarah stared at the note, her mind racing. RJ, the initials meant nothing to her, but it had to be the customer from yesterday. How had he found her? How did he know about Kevin? And most importantly, could she trust him? She checked the time, 1:45 p.m. If she was going to make the meeting, she needed to leave soon. But leaving Kevin alone felt impossible, especially after Weber's threatening call. Sarah approached the nurse's station where a middle-aged woman was updating charts. "Excuse me, my brother Kevin Mitchell is there. Any way I could be notified immediately if there's any change in his condition? I need to step out for an hour or so." The nurse looked up sympathetically. "We have your cell number on file. We'll call if there's any change, but he's stable now. The sedation will keep him comfortable for several hours." Sarah nodded gratefully. "Thank you. I'll be back as soon as possible." As she gathered her coat and bag, Sarah made her decision. Meeting this mysterious ally was a risk, but staying trapped in Weber's web was certain disaster. For Kevin's sake, she had to take the chance. Leaving the hospital, Sarah didn't notice the dark sedan parked across the street, nor the man inside taking her photograph as she hailed a taxi to Riverside Park. Richard arrived at Riverside Park 30 minutes early, using the time to secure the perimeter and confirm he hadn't been followed. The autumn afternoon had brought out joggers and dog walkers, providing sufficient cover without overwhelming crowds. He'd selected this location carefully, public enough for safety, but with multiple exit routes if needed. He spotted Sarah Mitchell approaching from the south entrance, her posture tense and watchful. Despite her obvious exhaustion, she moved with purpose, scanning her surroundings with the heightened awareness of someone who knew they might be in danger. Richard approached casually, falling into step beside her on the walking path. "Keep walking," he said quietly. "Don't look directly at me." Sarah flinched but complied, her voice barely audible. "You're the man from the restaurant. How did you find me?" "That's complicated, but I'm here to help, just like I said in the note." "Why should I trust you? I don't even know your name." "Rick Jensen," Richard supplied using his cover identity. "Former Marine Gulf War veteran. And you're right not to trust me, not yet. But right now, I'm the only chance you've got against Weber." Sarah glanced at him sidelong. "How do you know about Weber? What's your interest in all this?" "I've been tracking Heartland Provisions," Richard explained, sticking close to his cover story. "They're operating out of a facility that was shut down for safety violations. People died, Sarah, and now they're back in business selling contaminated meat to high-end restaurants, including American Legacy." They reached a quieter section of the park, and Richard guided them to a bench with a clear view in all directions. "Weber called me this morning," Sarah said once they were seated. "He knows I passed you a note. He's demanding I meet him tonight with falsified accounting documents." Richard felt a surge of protective anger. "What exactly does he have on you?" Sarah hesitated, weighing how much to reveal to this stranger. "My brother has cystic fibrosis. He's in the ICU right now. Weber knows I can't lose my job because Kevin needs my health insurance. He's using that to force me to help cover up his operation." "By falsifying books," Sarah nodded. "I have some accounting background. Weber found a minor discrepancy in an inventory report and blew it up into a fabricated theft accusation. He claims I owe the restaurant $7,500, which is ridiculous. But he's using it to blackmail me into helping with his real scam. Which is money laundering, I think. The invoices from Heartland Provisions are for premium, quality meat at top prices, but what actually gets delivered is substandard. The difference goes somewhere else, cash deposits to accounts I've never seen on the official books." Sarah ran a hand through her hair, frustration evident. "I don't have proof, just what I've managed to glimpse in his office. The real evidence is in the safe behind the Declaration painting." Richard considered this information, aligning it with what Thomas and Rebecca had uncovered about Patriot Enterprises. "Have you told anyone else about this?" Sarah shook her head. "Who would believe me? Weber has connections throughout the company. And without proof, it's just the word of a waitress against a respected manager." "You have more than your word now," Richard assured her. "You have me, and I have friends with the resources to expose this operation." Sarah studied him skeptically. "No offense, but you don't exactly look like someone with powerful connections." Richard smiled faintly. "Appearances can be deceiving. I served with people who went on to do important things, people who still believe in justice. Justice won't pay my brother's medical bills if I lose my job," Sarah replied bluntly. "And it won't protect him if Weber decides to retaliate. He's completely vulnerable in that hospital bed. What if I could guarantee your brother's safety and continued medical care regardless of what happens with Weber?" Sarah's expression hardened with suspicion. How could you possibly do that? Who are you really? Before Richard could respond, his phone vibrated. A text from Rebecca Weber on the move, heading toward Brooklyn. Possible destination hospital. Call ASAP. We need to move, Richard said, urgently standing. Weber's on his way to the hospital right now. Sarah's face drained of color. Kevin is going to be fine, Richard assured her firmly. But we need to act now. My colleague is tracking Weber. I need you to tell me everything about the safe in his office model age location, anything that might help us access it. You're going to break in, Sarah asked, disbelief evident in her voice. We're going to acquire the evidence needed to stop Weber and protect your brother, Richard corrected. But first we need to get you somewhere safe. Sarah hesitated, clearly torn between fear and the desperate need to trust someone. The safe is a Windsor TS 440, she finally said, behind the Declaration of Independence painting in his office. I've seen him open it once. The combinations seem to be related to his Little League jersey number and championship year. There's a black leather ledger inside, plus external hard drives and cash. Richard nodded quickly, texting this information to Rebecca. Thank you. Now, do you have someone who can stay with Kevin? Someone Weber doesn't know about. My friend Melissa from college. She lives in Queens but could come in an emergency. Call her, tell her to get to the hospital as soon as possible, but not to tell anyone she's there for Kevin. Then you're coming with me to meet someone who can help us plan our next move. Sarah still looked uncertain. And I'm just supposed to trust that you're not leading me into an even worse situation. Richard met her gaze directly. You trusted me enough to risk your job by passing that note. I'm asking you to trust me again. Not for my sake, but for Kevin's. After a moment's consideration, Sarah nodded. All right, but if anything happens to my brother because of this, it won't, Richard promised. Weber's game ends today. As they left the park, Richard's phone buzzed again with an update from Rebecca Weber at hospital. Surveillance in place. Bringing extraction team to Manhattan location at 2100 hours. Secured warrant based on food safety violations. FBI contact briefed and standing by. Events were accelerating faster than Richard had anticipated. What had begun as a simple undercover investigation into his restaurant's management was rapidly evolving into a coordinated law enforcement operation. And at the center of it all was Sarah Mitchell, a young woman who'd had the courage to slip a note to a stranger when she saw something wrong. Richard was increasingly certain that saving his company would mean first ensuring her safety, a responsibility he hadn't expected, but now embraced fully. Where are we going? Sarah asked as Richard hailed a taxi. To meet the cavalry, he replied, opening the door for her. It's time to show you that you are not alone in this fight. The Manhattan skyline blazed with light as darkness fell, the American Legacy restaurant illuminated like a stage set against the night. Under ordinary circumstances, the dining room would be filled with wealthy patrons enjoying overpriced steaks and rare bourbons. Tonight, however, the establishment was eerily quiet, closed for an emergency maintenance issue, a cover story hastily arranged by Thomas to facilitate their operation. Richard, Rebecca, and Sarah approached from different directions, communicating through discreet earpieces Thomas had provided. Richard and Rebecca wore the white jackets and clipboards of health department inspectors, while Sarah arrived in her server uniform, her presence explained by an emergency staff meeting Weber had called. Weber's already inside, Rebecca murmured into her comm as she observed the restaurant from across the street. 2 other men with him. They don't look like restaurant staff. Muscle, Richard replied, positioning himself at the service entrance. Patriot Enterprises doesn't take chances. Sarah's voice came through tense but controlled. I'm approaching the front entrance now. 3 other servers are here too. Weber must have called in several staff members as cover. Remember the plan, Richard cautioned. You go in first, act normal. We'll enter with the health department team 5 minutes later. Your only job is to keep Weber distracted long enough for us to access his office. Understood, Sarah confirmed, though the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her nervousness. Richard watched as Sarah straightened her shoulders and entered the restaurant through the main doors, the very picture of a dedicated employee responding to her manager's summons. 5 minutes that felt like an eternity later, Richard and Rebecca joined the actual health department, inspectors, 2 serious-looking women armed with documentation and testing equipment at the service entrance. Everyone clear on their roles, Rebecca asked the inspectors. This is officially about food safety violations, but we're also gathering evidence for a potential criminal investigation. Standard protocols apply. The inspectors nodded professionals who understood their part in the larger operation. Richard felt a surge of gratitude for Thomas's efficiency in organizing this coalition of allies on such short notice. As they entered through the kitchen, Richard was struck by how different the restaurant appeared after hours. The glamour was diminished, and under the harsh fluorescent lights, the expensive furnishings reduced to mere props on an empty stage. In the main dining room, Weber stood near the bar speaking intently with two men whose expensive suits couldn't quite disguise their enforcer physiques. Sarah and the other servers clustered nervously by the hostess stand, clearly confused about why they'd been summoned. When the health inspectors entered, Weber's head snapped up, his expression shifting from surprise to barely contained fury. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, striding toward them. "We're closed for a private staff meeting." The lead inspector, a stern woman with steel-gray hair, presented her credentials. "Douglas Weber. I'm Margaret Chen from the Department of Health. We've received reports of potential food safety violations that warrant immediate investigation." Weber's face flushed. "This is preposterous. American Legacy has a perfect safety record. Who made these accusations?" "Complaints are confidential, Mr. Weber," Inspector Chen replied coolly. "But given their serious nature, we're required to conduct a thorough inspection immediately. These colleagues will assist." She gestured to Richard and Rebecca, who nodded professionally. Weber's gaze swept over them, lingering momentarily on Richard. A flicker of recognition crossed his features, not quite placing him as the expensive steak customer, but sensing something familiar. "Fine," Weber said tightly, "but make it quick. As you can see, we're in the middle of an important staff meeting. We'll need access to all areas," Inspector Chen continued. "Kitchen, storage offices, everything." Weber's composure slipped for a moment. "My office is private. It contains confidential business documents unrelated to food service." "Nevertheless, Mr. Weber, full access is required under Code Section 23.1, Chen insisted. "Unless you prefer we return with police escort and a warrant." The implied threat hung in the air. Weber's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. "Very well, but I'll need to secure certain documents first." "That won't be necessary," Rebecca interjected smoothly. "We'll be present during the inspection of your office to ensure nothing confidential is compromised." Weber's eyes narrowed, sensing the trap closing around him. He turned to the two men in suits who had moved closer during the exchange, their posture subtly threatening. "Mr. Ellis, Mr. Ramirez, perhaps you could show these inspectors our kitchen facilities while I organize my office." Weber suggested, his tone making it clear this was not a request. Richard caught Sarah's eye across the room, giving an almost imperceptible nod. Right on cue, Sarah stepped forward. "Mr. Weber, before they inspect the kitchen, shouldn't I pull the temperature logs from your office and the vendor certification documents? You asked me to update those yesterday." It was a masterful intervention, providing a legitimate reason for her to access Weber's office while reminding him of his leverage over her. Weber hesitated, clearly torn between keeping Sarah away from the inspectors and maintaining his control over her. "Fine," he finally said. "Mitchell, come with me. The rest of you, please show our unexpected guests the kitchen." As Weber led Sarah toward his office, Richard and Rebecca exchanged glances. This deviation from their plan was risky, but it placed Sarah exactly where they needed her, with access to Weber's office before he could destroy evidence. "Teams Alpha and Bravo proceed with kitchen inspection," Rebecca murmured into her comm, using the predetermined code to signal the health inspectors to be particularly thorough, keeping Weber's enforcers occupied. "Team Charlie maintained position." Richard followed Inspector Chen toward the freezers, keeping one eye on the corridor leading to Weber's office. The plan required perfect timing. They needed evidence from the safe, but not at the expense of Sarah's safety. Inside his office, Weber closed the door behind Sarah, his charm evaporating instantly. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to a chair as he moved behind his desk. "This timing is remarkably unfortunate, wouldn't you say, Mitchell?" "I don't know what you mean," Sarah replied, feigning confusion. "I came as soon as you called, just like everyone else." Weber's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Indeed, and mere hours after our conversation about your brother's unfortunate condition, health inspectors appear at my door." He opened his desk drawer, removing a leather-bound ledger. "Strange coincidences seem to follow you lately." Sarah maintained her composure, though her heart hammered in her chest. "I've been at the hospital all day. I had nothing to do with this inspection." "Perhaps not directly," Weber conceded, his voice dangerously soft. "But your newfound friend, the one you passed a note to yesterday, he seems to have taken a remarkable interest in our operation." Sarah's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you're talking about, Eden." "Please, Mitchell, don't insult my intelligence." Weber circled the desk, moving closer to her. "A man matching his description was observed watching the restaurant all afternoon. Then he visits your brother in the hospital. And now, coincidentally, health inspectors arrive." Through her earpiece, Sarah could hear Richard and Rebecca responding to this revelation, their voices tense as they recalibrated their approach. They hadn't anticipated that Weber had Sarah's brother under surveillance. "My brother has nothing to do with this," Sarah insisted, genuine fear coloring her voice. "On the contrary, your brother has everything to do with this." Weber moved to the painting of the Declaration of Independence, swinging it aside to reveal the safe. "He's the reason you'll do exactly as I tell you, right now." Weber entered the combination, the safe door swinging open to reveal stacks of cash, external hard drives, and files. He removed a USB drive and several documents, placing them in his briefcase. "The situation has become untenable." He continued, his tone conversational despite the menace underlying his words. "Patriot Enterprises has decided to terminate operations at this location. Unfortunately, that necessitates eliminating loose ends, including you, Mitchell." Sarah rose from her chair, instinctively backing toward the door. "You can't threaten me. There are health inspectors right outside, who will be thoroughly occupied for at least another 30 minutes, Weber replied calmly. "By which time you'll have unfortunately suffered a tragic accident in our wine cellar. Those steep stairs can be quite treacherous when wet." As Weber advanced toward her, Sarah's hand moved to her pocket, pressing the panic button Rebecca had given her earlier. Through her earpiece, she heard Richard's immediate response. "Moving to extraction. Hold position 30 seconds." Weber reached for Sarah's arm, but she sidestepped him, years of waitressing having made her adept at avoiding unwanted contact. "You won't get away with this," she said, playing for time as she heard rapid footsteps approaching in the corridor. "Too many people know what you're doing." "Know what exactly?" Weber countered. "That I've been selling discount meat to maintain profit margins, hardly worth killing over." "But you've seen too much, Mitchell. The ledgers, the accounts. Patriot doesn't tolerate loose ends." The door burst open, revealing Richard and Rebecca, both with weapons drawn, a shocking escalation that momentarily froze Weber in place. "Federal agents," Rebecca announced, her FBI training evident in her commanding presence. "Step away from her, Weber." Weber recovered quickly, a calculating smile replacing his surprise. "Federal agents, I think not. The health department doesn't carry firearms." "We're not with the health department," Richard stated flatly. "And you're under arrest for fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder." Weber's gaze narrowed as he finally recognized Richard. "You're the man from yesterday, Mitchell's mysterious ally." His eyes widened further as the pieces fell into place. "No, you're Richard Harrington, the CEO." Richard didn't confirm or deny, keeping his weapon trained on Weber. "Step away from Ms. Mitchell. Now." Instead, Weber lunged for his desk drawer. Rebecca fired a warning shot into the ceiling, the report deafening in the confined space. "Next one won't miss," she warned. Weber froze, his hand inches from the drawer. "You have no idea what you're involving yourselves in," he hissed. "Patriot Enterprises doesn't forgive interference. Neither does your son." The deliberate mention of Michael struck Richard like a physical blow, but he maintained his composure. "My son has nothing to do with this." Weber's laugh was cold and knowing. "Doesn't he? Who do you think authorized Heartland Provisions as a vendor? Who signed off on every invoice? Michael Harrington." The revelation hung in the air, devastating in its implications. Richard's aim wavered momentarily, giving Weber the opening he needed. He yanked open the drawer, pulling out not a weapon as they'd feared, but a remote detonator. "Insurance policy," Weber explained, his finger hovering over the button. "The kitchen. Enough propane to take out half the block, unless you let me walk out of here. Now." The standoff was interrupted by a new voice from the doorway. "That won't be necessary, Doug." All heads turned to see Michael Harrington standing in the entrance, his expression unreadable. At 32, he was the younger version of his father, tall, commanding, with the same piercing gaze, but none of the warmth Richard occasionally allowed himself to display. Michael. Richard breathed, shock evident in his voice. What are you doing here? Cleaning up another one of your messes, father, Michael replied coldly. As usual. Weber's smile returned triumphant. Perfect timing, Mr. Harrington. Your father and his friends were just about to make a terrible mistake. Michael stepped fully into the room, surveying the scene with clinical detachment. The mistake was yours, Doug. You got sloppy, drawing attention with your threats against a waitress and her brother, creating paper trails that any first-year accountant could follow. Patriot is most displeased. Weber's confidence faltered. What are you talking about? I followed every protocol. The money laundering operation has been flawless. Until it wasn't, Michael corrected. Now put down that detonator before this situation becomes unsalvageable. Richard stared at his son, unable to reconcile the young man before him with the child he'd raised. Michael, tell me you are not part of this. Michael met his father's gaze evenly. Part of what exactly? A business decision to source meat from a more affordable supplier? Or are you referring to Doug's side business with Patriot, which I've spent the last 6 months investigating for the FBI? The room went silent as everyone processed this revelation. Weber's face contorted in fury and disbelief. You're working with the feds, he sputtered. You signed the vendor agreements. You approved every invoice. I did, Michael acknowledged calmly, while documenting every discrepancy and tracing every dollar back to Patriot's accounts. It's called building a case, Doug. Rebecca lowered her weapon slightly, professional interest overtaking her surprise. You're the confidential informant Agent Wilkins mentioned, the one inside Harrington Global. Michael nodded. For the past 8 months, we needed to identify everyone involved before making arrests. Tonight's operation was supposed to be the culmination. He glanced pointedly at his father. Until amateur hour interrupted things. Richard's mind reeled, relief and indignation battling within him. Why didn't you tell me I'm your father? I'm the CEO. Which is precisely why I couldn't tell you, Michael replied. Your reaction needed to be genuine for the operation to succeed. And frankly, father, your acting skills have never been your strong suit. Before Richard could respond, Weber made his move, lunging towards Sarah with unexpected speed. She reacted instinctively, grabbing the heavy crystal paperweight from Weber's desk and swinging it with all her strength. Weber froze his hand inches from the drawer. You have no idea what you're involving yourselves in, he hissed. Patriot Enterprises doesn't forgive interference. Neither does your son. The deliberate mention of Michael struck Richard like a physical blow, but he maintained his composure. My son has nothing to do with this. Weber's laugh was cold and knowing. Doesn't he? Who do you think authorized Heartland Provisions as a vendor? Who signed off on every invoice? M.H. Michael Harrington. The revelation hung in the air, devastating in its implications. Richard's aim wavered momentarily, giving Weber the opening he needed. He yanked open the drawer, pulling out not a weapon as they'd feared, but a remote detonator. Insurance policy, Weber explained, his finger hovering over the button. The kitchen, enough propane to take out half the block. Unless you let me walk out of here. Now. The standoff was interrupted by a new voice from the doorway. That won't be necessary, Doug. All heads turned to see Michael Harrington standing in the entrance, his expression unreadable. At 32, he was the younger version of his father, tall, commanding, with the same piercing gaze but none of the warmth Richard occasionally allowed himself to display. Michael. Richard breathed, shock evident in his voice. What are you doing here? Cleaning up another one of your messes, father, Michael replied coldly. As usual. Weber's smile returned triumphant. Perfect timing, Mr. Harrington. Your father and his friends were just about to make a terrible mistake. Michael stepped fully into the room, surveying the scene with clinical detachment. The mistake was yours, Doug. You got sloppy, drawing attention with your threats against a waitress and her brother, creating paper trails that any first-year accountant could follow. Patriot is most displeased. Weber's confidence faltered. What are you talking about? I followed every protocol. The money laundering operation has been flawless. Until it wasn't, Michael corrected. Now put down that detonator before this situation becomes unsalvageable. Richard stared at his son, unable to reconcile the young man before him with the child he'd raised. Michael, tell me you're not part of this. Michael met his father's gaze evenly. Part of what exactly a business decision to source meat from a more affordable supplier? Or are you referring to Doug's side business with Patriot, which I've spent the last 6 months investigating for the FBI? The room went silent as everyone processed this revelation. Weber's face contorted in fury and disbelief. You're working with the feds, he sputtered. You signed the vendor agreements. You approved every invoice. I did, Michael acknowledged calmly, while documenting every discrepancy and tracing every dollar back to Patriot's accounts. It's called building a case, Doug. Rebecca lowered her weapon, slightly professional interest overtaking her surprise. You're the confidential informant Agent Wilkins mentioned, the one inside Harrington Global. Michael nodded. For the past 8 months, we needed to identify everyone involved before making arrests. Tonight's operation was supposed to be the culmination. He glanced pointedly at his father. Until amateur hour interrupted things. Richard's mind reeled, relief and indignation battling within him. Why didn't you tell me I'm your father? I'm the CEO. Which is precisely why I couldn't tell you, Michael replied. Your reaction needed to be genuine for the operation to succeed. And frankly, Father, your acting skills have never been your strong suit. Before Richard could respond, Weber made his move, lunging towards Sarah with unexpected speed. She reacted instinctively, grabbing the heavy crystal paperweight from Weber's desk and swinging it with all her strength. The impact caught Weber on the temple, sending him crashing to the floor, the detonator skittering under the desk. Michael moved swiftly, retrieving the device, while Rebecca secured Weber, who lay stunned but conscious. Nice swing, Michael commented to Sarah, genuine respect in his voice. Ever consider a career in law enforcement? Sarah, still processing the rapid turn of events, managed a shaky smile. I think I'll stick to accounting, if it's all the same to you. The tension in the room dissipated as FBI agents previously positioned throughout the building swarmed in to secure Weber and collect evidence from the safe. Richard holstered his weapon, a precaution Thomas had insisted upon, despite his reluctance, and approached his son. Michael, he began, uncertain what to say after everything that had transpired. I thought, when Weber said your initials, you thought I was capable of endangering customers for profit? Michael asked, hurt briefly visible beneath his professional exterior. After everything you taught me about integrity and responsibility. Richard had the grace to look ashamed. I didn't know what to think. You've been so distant lately, defensive about operations. I feared the worst. Michael's expression softened marginally. The distance was necessary for the operation. And yes, I've been defensive because I've been trying to protect the company and you from what was happening right under our noses. The awkward father-son reunion was interrupted by Rebecca, who had finished handing Weber over to the FBI team. As touching as this is, she said dryly, we still have a situation at the hospital. Weber mentioned associates watching Sarah's brother. Michael nodded crisply. Already handled. FBI agents relieved your security team 20 minutes ago. The brother is safe and under protection. Richard blinked in surprise. You know about Thomas's involvement? I know everything, Father. Michael replied with the faintest hint of a smile, including your little undercover adventure as Rick Jensen. Former Marine Gulf War veteran, Chilean, you couldn't come up with a more original cover identity. For the first time in what felt like years, Richard laughed, a genuine expression of relief and lingering disbelief at how thoroughly he had misjudged the situation. Sarah, watching this exchange while giving her statement to an FBI agent, caught Richard's eye. The question in her gaze was clear. Who was this man she had trusted with her life? Richard nodded slightly, acknowledging that explanations were overdue. But first they needed to ensure that Weber and his Patriot Enterprises connections were securely in custody and that Kevin Mitchell remained safe from potential retaliation. The real revelations and the reckoning that would follow were just beginning. The downtown offices of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division hummed with activity despite the late hour. In a glass-walled conference room, Richard and Michael Harrington sat across from each other, decades of unspoken tensions and misunderstandings between them. Sarah Mitchell occupied a chair at the end of the table, still processing the revelation that the man she'd known as Rick Jensen was actually Richard Harrington, billionaire CEO of the very company that employed her. So none of it was real, she said, breaking the uncomfortable silence. The truck driver story, the Marine background, it was all just a cover. Richard met her gaze directly. What all of it? I did serve in Desert Storm, though, not as a Marine. And the reason I gave for helping you wanting justice for people harmed by contaminated food that was completely genuine. But you lied about who you were, Sarah pressed. You let me risk everything without telling me who I was really dealing with. I couldn't tell you, Richard admitted. At the time, I didn't know who was involved or how high the conspiracy reached. For your safety as much as the investigation, maintaining my cover was essential. Michael cleared his throat. If it helps Ms. Mitchell, he didn't tell me either. I had no idea my father was playing amateur detective until I saw him in Weber's office tonight. Richard shot his son an irritated glance. As opposed to you playing professional FBI informant without bothering to mention it to your father or CEO. Operational security required complete compartmentalization, Michael replied stiffly. Only Agent Wilkins and his direct superiors knew my role. Rebecca Daniels entered the conference room accompanied by a stern-faced man in his 50s, whom she introduced as FBI Special Agent Derek Wilkins. The agent's weathered face suggested years of experience with complex cases and difficult personalities. Mr. Harrington, both Mr. Harringtons, Wilkins began, taking a seat at the head of the table. While I appreciate your initiative, I need to be clear that your actions tonight nearly compromised an 8-month federal investigation into Patriot Enterprises. Richard straightened, prepared to defend his decisions, but Wilkins continued before he could speak. However, the agent acknowledged your involvement also accelerated our timeline, forcing Weber to make mistakes that provided additional evidence. So while I can't condone your methods, I can't entirely condemn the results. Weber is talking, Rebecca asked. Wilkins nodded, singing like a canary. With the evidence from his safe and his own testimony, we've already executed warrants at 3 other American Legacy locations and identified 7 more Patriot Enterprises operations across the country. Sarah leaned forward anxiously. What about my brother? Is he still in danger? Kevin is fine, Wilkins assured her. We've arranged for additional security at the hospital until we've rounded up all of Weber's associates, which brings me to you, Ms. Mitchell. His expression softened slightly. Your actions, while incredibly risky, demonstrated remarkable courage. The FBI would like to formally thank you for bringing this operation to our attention. Sarah seemed taken aback by this recognition. I just did what anyone would do. No, Richard interjected firmly. You did what very few people would have done. You saw something wrong and refused to look away, even at great personal risk. That kind of integrity is rare. Michael nodded in agreement. Weber had most of the staff thoroughly intimidated. You were the only one who acted. Sarah accepted their praise with uncomfortable grace, then addressed the question that had been weighing on her since the revelation of Richard's true identity. What happens now to American Legacy, to my job? Richard and Michael exchanged glances, a moment of father-son understanding passing between them. American Legacy will undergo a complete restructuring, Richard explained. Full transparency with health officials, new supply chain protocols, rigorous financial oversight. We'll probably need to close temporarily during the investigation and reopen under a different name once we've regained the public's trust. As for your job, Michael added, that depends entirely on you. Given your accounting background and obvious integrity, we'd like to offer you a position in our new compliance department. Full tuition assistance to complete your degree if you're interested. Sarah stared at them, clearly struggling to process this unexpected turn of events. And Kevin's medical care. Harrington Global will establish a healthcare trust for him, Richard said without hesitation, covering all treatments, medications, and specialists he needs, regardless of whether you accept the position. Why would you do that? Sarah asked, suspicious of such generosity. Richard's expression grew serious. Because it's the right thing to do, and because your actions reminded me of something I'd forgotten somewhere along the way, that the purpose of wealth and power isn't just accumulation. It's responsibility. Agent Wilkins cleared his throat. While this is all very touching, we still have serious matters to discuss. The press will get wind of this operation by morning. Harrington Global stock will take a significant hit when the markets open. Let it, Richard said firmly. Transparency is the only way forward. We'll issue a complete statement acknowledging the failures in our oversight and detailing the steps we're taking to ensure nothing like this happens again. Michael nodded in agreement. I've already drafted a crisis management plan. We'll take the hit now, implement comprehensive reforms, and rebuild our reputation the right way through actions, not just words. As the discussion continued into the early morning hours, focusing on the practical details of the federal case against Patriot Enterprises and the corporate response from Harrington Global, Richard found himself watching Sarah Mitchell. Despite her exhaustion, she remained engaged, offering insights from her firsthand experience with Weber's operation that proved valuable to the investigators. In her, Richard saw something he'd been searching for throughout his company: genuine integrity combined with practical intelligence, the kind of character that couldn't be taught in business school or manufactured through corporate training programs. Whatever the financial cost to Harrington Global, and it would be substantial, Richard knew that uncovering this corruption and meeting Sarah Mitchell had given him something far more valuable than profits. It had given him a chance to reclaim the principles upon which he had originally built his company, and perhaps more importantly, an opportunity to rebuild his relationship with his son. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, it felt authentic. 6 months later, the newly renovated dining space at 57th Street gleamed under soft lighting. Gone was the ostentatious, patriotic decor of American legacy, replaced by a warmly elegant aesthetic that emphasized craftsmanship and authenticity. The new name, Foundations, spoke to the restaurant's commitment to building from the ground up, both in its cuisine and its business practices. Richard Harrington surveyed the space from the entrance, noting with approval the transparent glass walls of the kitchen that allowed diners to observe food preparation, the digital display showing real-time temperature monitoring of meat storage, and the framed certificates documenting the ethical sourcing of every ingredient. Nervous? Michael asked, joining his father. Cautiously optimistic, Richard replied. The other locations have been well received since reopening. This one's different. It's where everything started. Michael straightened his tie, a habit he had unconsciously adopted from his father. The press will be looking for any hint of problems. Let them look, Richard said confidently. We have nothing to hide anymore. The Patriot Enterprises investigation had expanded far beyond American legacy restaurants, uncovering a network of money laundering operations that extended into real estate import-export businesses and even local government. Douglas Weber had ultimately cooperated fully with federal prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence, providing evidence that had led to dozens of arrests and the seizure of over $50 million in assets. Harrington Global had weathered the storm better than many had predicted. The stock had initially plunged nearly 40% when the scandal broke, but Richard's immediate and transparent response, taking full responsibility, implementing sweeping reforms, and personally overseeing the reorganization, had gradually restored investor confidence. More importantly, the crisis had transformed the company's culture from within. With Richard and Michael now working in genuine partnership, Harrington Global had emerged as an industry leader in ethical business practices and corporate accountability. Sarah's running late, Michael noted, checking his watch. The hospital called her about Kevin's test results. Richard nodded, concern crossing his features. Good news, I hope. Mr. Harrington, a young host approached respectfully. Your guests have arrived. In the private dining room, the invited guests for the pre-opening dinner represented a carefully selected cross-section: food critics, ethical business advocates, health department officials, and key employees. Richard moved through the room with practiced ease, greeting each person warmly, while Michael handled the more formal aspects of the event. Sarah Mitchell arrived just as the appetizers were being served, slipping in quietly through a side entrance. Richard immediately noted the change in her over the past 6 months, the confidence she now carried, the tailored business attire that had replaced her server's uniform, the lightness in her expression that spoke of burdens lifted. Sorry I'm late, she apologized, joining Richard and Michael. Kevin's appointment ran long. Nothing serious, I hope, Richard inquired. Sarah's face broke into a radiant smile. The opposite, actually. The new treatment protocol is working better than expected. His lung function has improved 30%, and they're talking about releasing him from the specialized care unit next month. That's wonderful news, Richard said warmly, genuinely pleased for the young man whose situation had become unexpectedly intertwined with his company's transformation. He asked me to thank you again, Sarah added. The specialists you brought in from Switzerland, they've made all the difference. Richard waved away her gratitude. The foundation exists precisely for cases like Kevin's. I'm just glad we could help. The Harrington Health Initiative, established in the wake of the scandal, had already assisted dozens of patients with rare conditions who had fallen through the cracks of traditional insurance systems. It was one of several redemptive measures Richard had implemented, channeling his resources toward meaningful impact rather than mere profit. "How's the compliance department treating you?" Michael asked Sarah. "Any regrets about accepting the position?" "None," Sarah replied confidently. "Though I never imagined my accounting degree would lead to designing ethics protocols for a multinational corporation." The new supplier verification system goes live next week, by the way. Every restaurant in the group will have complete transparency on food sourcing, accessible to customers via QR codes on the menu. Richard nodded approvingly. From waitress to chief compliance officer in 6 months. Quite a journey. With a few dramatic moments in between, Sarah added with wry humor, the three of them sharing a knowing look that acknowledged their unlikely bond forged through danger and mutual respect. The evening progressed smoothly, the carefully prepared meal showcasing the restaurant's renewed commitment to quality and integrity. When the time came for Richard to address the gathering, he rose with the quiet confidence that had characterized his leadership throughout his career. 6 months ago, Harrington Global faced a crisis of our own making. He began, his voice carrying throughout the room without need for amplification. Through inadequate oversight and a culture that prioritized appearances over substance, we enabled criminal elements to infiltrate our operations and endanger our customers. He paused, surveying the attentive faces before him. The easy path would have been cosmetic changes, new policies that look good on paper but change nothing fundamental about how we operate. Instead, we chose the harder road: complete transparency, genuine accountability, and a recognition that a company's true value isn't measured quarterly, but generationally. Richard gestured to Michael and Sarah, inviting them to join him. This transformation wouldn't have been possible without courage, the courage to face uncomfortable truths and make difficult changes. My son Michael demonstrated that courage by working with federal authorities to expose corruption, even when it meant investigating his own family's company. And Sarah Mitchell showed remarkable courage when, as a waitress with everything to lose, she risked her livelihood to protect the public. He raised his glass in a toast. Foundations isn't just the name of this restaurant. It's our commitment to building on solid ground, ethical practices, authentic relationships, and genuine value. Thank you all for being part of this new beginning. As the applause faded and conversations resumed, Richard found himself momentarily alone, observing the gathering with a perspective that only recent events could have given him. His company was smaller now, more focused, but infinitely more meaningful than the sprawling conglomerate he'd built through decades of relentless expansion. More precious still was the renewed connection with his son. The months of working side by side to rebuild Harrington Global had healed wounds Richard had feared were permanent, creating a partnership based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Later, as the event wound down and guests began to depart, Richard stepped outside onto the restaurant's small terrace. The New York night spread before him, a tapestry of lights against darkness. He heard the door open behind him and turned to find Michael approaching with 2 glasses of bourbon. "Thought you might need this," his son said, offering one of the tumblers. "It's been a long day." "Thanks." Richard accepted the drink, appreciating the gesture as much as the bourbon. Successful, though, the new Foundations is off to a strong start. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, father and son contemplating the city that had witnessed both their greatest achievements and most painful failures. "I've been thinking about something Weber said that night," Michael finally ventured. "About how I was always cleaning up your messes." Richard tensed slightly, the comment having struck a nerve. That wasn't entirely untrue. "No, but it wasn't the whole truth either," Michael replied thoughtfully. "I realized something during all this. I've spent my entire career trying to prove I wasn't just Richard Harrington's son, that I earned my position through merit, not nepotism." "Which you did," Richard affirmed. "Maybe." Michael swirled the bourbon in his glass. "But I was so focused on establishing my independence that I missed the value of our connection. What happened these past months, rebuilding the company together, creating something better than what came before, it wouldn't have been possible if we weren't father and son." Richard felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with the evening's rich food. "I wasn't always the father you deserved, Michael. The company became my identity, my purpose. I forgot what I was building it for. We're cut from the same cloth, Michael acknowledged with a small smile. Stubborn, driven, terrible at expressing emotions. But when it mattered, when real principles were at stake, we both made the right choice. That's not coincidence, Dad. That's legacy. The word hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond corporate assets or financial holdings. Legacy, the true inheritance, passed from father to son, values forged through both its success and failure. Speaking of legacy, Richard said, seizing the moment, I've been considering my next steps. Michael raised an eyebrow. Retirement. Somehow I can't picture you on a golf course in Florida. Richard laughed. God, no, but it might be time for a transition in leadership. You've more than proven yourself these past months. The board would support your appointment as CEO. Michael studied his father's expression, looking for signs of reluctance or reservation, finding none. And what would you do? He asked. Focus on the foundation. Expand its reach. Use what I've learned, good and bad, to help other organizations build ethical frameworks. Richard's gaze returned to the city skyline. There's more to life than corner offices and quarterly reports. Sarah and her brother reminded me of that. She's quite something, Michael agreed. Integrity like hers is rare. Indeed, Richard raised his glass. To Legacy's son, not the one measured in dollars, but the one measured in lives touched and principles upheld. Michael clinked his glass against his father's. To legacy and to new foundations. As they finished their bourbon in companionable silence, Richard reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought him here. What had begun as a routine board meeting and concerns about restaurant performance had evolved into a profound reassessment of his life's work and relationships. The company that emerged from the crisis was stronger, not despite the challenges, but because of them, forged in the crucible of accountability and redemption. And while the path forward would undoubtedly hold new challenges, Richard faced them with something he hadn't felt in years, purpose beyond profit, and the quiet satisfaction of building something truly worthwhile. In Sarah Mitchell, he had found an unexpected moral compass whose courage had redirected the course of his company. In his son, he had rediscovered a relationship more valuable than any business empire. And in himself, Richard Harrington had finally reconciled the ambitious young veteran who had founded the company with the man he had become, someone who understood that true success wasn't measured in billions of dollars, but in the integrity of one's actions and the quality of one's impact on others. As they turned to rejoin the gathering inside, Richard knew with certainty that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, the foundations beneath his feet were finally solid, authentic, and true.